The phantom time. Hypothesis. The stolen centuries, the glitch in the calendar. The year that isn't. Check your watch. Look at your phone. It says April 2026. You plan your life around this number. You pay your taxes, celebrate birthdays, and watch history documentaries based on a linear timeline that moves from year zero to today. We trust the calendar more than we trust our own memories. But what if I told you that the calendar is a lie? What if I told you that today is actually in the year 1729? Welcome to the phantom time hypothesis. This isn't just a fringe theory. It's a mathematical and archaeological puzzle that has left official historians sweating for decades. The core claim is simple yet terrifying. 297 years of our history never happened. Specifically, the years between 614 AD and 911 AD were manufactured. They exist only on paper, in forged documents, and in the imaginations of a few powerful men who wanted to reset the world's clock to suit their own divine narrative. You've heard of the Dark Ages. History tells us it was a time of stagnation, a time when humanity forgot how to build, write, and innovate. But in the Antiquitech paradigm, we ask a different question. Were the Dark Ages dark because we lost the light, or are they dark because they are a ghost? The archaeological silence. In the world of archaeology, there is a golden rule. People leave trash. Every civilization in history, from the Romans to the Victorians, left behind coins, pottery, foundation stones, and layers of soil that tell a story. If a city existed for 300 years, you will find 300 years of dirt. But when we look at the period between 614 and 911 AD in Europe, we find something impossible. Silence. There are no major architectural developments. There are no shifts in pottery styles. There is almost no evolution in the Latin language. It's as if humanity stood perfectly still for 3 centuries. Historians call this the Great Stagnation. We call it the data gap. If you were to build a house in the year 650 AD, where are the ruins? If a king minted coins in 800 AD, where is the physical evidence that isn't found in a curated museum collection? When independent researchers look for the physical hardware of these 3 centuries, the cupboard is bare. The software of history, the books and chronicles, tells us the world was busy. But the hardware of the earth says nobody was home. The holy conspiracy, the year 1000, why would anyone fake 300 years? Who has the power to edit time itself? Meet the architects of time, Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II. In the late 10th century, these 2 men were the most powerful figures in the Western world. Otto III was obsessed with the idea of millennialism. He believed that he was destined to be the emperor who reigned at the exact moment of the 1,000-year anniversary of the birth of Christ. To him, the year 1000 wasn't just a number. It was a mystical portal of power. But there was a problem. According to the actual timeline of the era, they were only in the 700s. They were 300 years too early for their prophetic moment. So they did what any absolute ruler would do. They changed the date. Working with the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, they coordinated a massive campaign of chronological forgery. They instructed monasteries across Europe, the only places where literacy and record-keeping existed, to begin backdating documents. They invented ancestors. They invented wars. They invented kings. By the time Otto III was crowned in the year 1000, the world had been gaslit into believing that 3 extra centuries had passed. They didn't just steal the land. They stole the timeline to cement their divine right to rule. The Charlemagne glitch. If you remove the years 614 to 911 AD, you lose the greatest hero of the Middle Ages, Charlemagne. History tells us Charlemagne was the father of Europe. He conquered the Saxons, was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, and started a renaissance of learning. But when you look at Charlemagne through the lens of a detective, the image starts to pixelate. Charlemagne is too perfect. He is a composite character. His biography, written by Einhard, is suspiciously similar to the biographies of Roman emperors from centuries prior. His palaces, like the one in Aachen, use architectural techniques, Antiquitech, that supposedly vanished for 400 years and then reappeared exactly as they were. In the phantom time hypothesis, Charlemagne didn't exist as a single human man. He was a literary proxy. He was the action hero written into the faked 300 years to give the era a sense of legitimacy. He is the software used to fill the hardware gap. If you take away the faked centuries, Charlemagne vanishes, and you realize that the transition from the fall of the Roman Empire to the rise of the Romanesque period happened almost overnight. The Islamic Revolution anomaly. It isn't just European history that suffers from the phantom glitch. Look at the Middle East. According to official history, the Islamic Golden Age began in the 7th century, during our missing gap. But archaeological sites in the Levant tell a different story. Many of the earliest mosques aren't pointed toward Mecca. They are pointed toward Petra. Many of the coins used in the early caliphate are almost identical to Byzantine coins from 300 years earlier. The missing 300 years forced Islamic history to stretch its own timeline to match the Western fraud. When you remove the phantom time, the sudden explosive rise of Islamic civilization aligns perfectly with the late Roman period. The gap was created to separate these civilizations, to make it look like they evolved independently over centuries, rather than being part of a single global Antiquitech conflict that happened much more recently than we are told. The sky doesn't lie, the Pope's math error. To solve a crime, you look for the glitch. In the case of the missing 300 years, the glitch is hidden in the very calendar hanging on your wall. In the year 1582, Pope Gregory XIII realized the world was out of sync. The old Julian calendar, established by Julius Caesar in 45 BC, was slightly inaccurate. It calculated the year as 365.25 days, but the actual solar year is approximately 365.24219 days. Because of this tiny discrepancy, the calendar drifts by about 1 day every 128 years. By 1582, the Catholic Church noticed that Easter was falling on the wrong date. They needed to reset the clock to align with the spring equinox. Now let's do the math. From 45 BC to 1582 AD is a span of 1,627 years. If you calculate the drift over 1,627 years, 1,627 years over 128 years per day is approximately 12.7 days. According to the math, Pope Gregory should have skipped 13 days to bring the calendar back into perfect alignment with the Roman era. But look at the historical record. On October 4th, 1582, the Pope ordered the world to skip forward to October 15th. He only skipped 10 days. Image: a whiteboard drawing of a calendar page being ripped, showing October 4th, then jumping to October 15th. Below it, a giant red question mark with the number 3 days missing. Why only 10 days? If the drift was 13 days, and he only corrected for 10, he left 3 days of drift on the table. In calendar math, 3 days of drift equals approximately 297 years. Pope Gregory corrected the calendar perfectly, but he didn't correct it back to the time of Julius Caesar. He corrected it back to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD because that's when he thought the timeline started. He accidentally proved that the 300 years between the Romans and the High Middle Ages did not exist. The sky told him the truth, and he had to adjust the paper to match the phantom years that Otto III had added. Halley's Comet, the recycling of stars. The architects can burn books, and they can fake calendars, but they cannot control the stars. Astronomical events are the immutable hard drive of history. Take Halley's Comet. It appears in our sky roughly every 75 to 76 years. Official history claims to have recorded its appearance throughout the missing gap, 614 to 911 AD. But when you compare the European records to the ancient Chinese records, the glitch appears again. In the European chronicles, the comet appearances during the phantom years are described with vague, poetic language. There are no precise measurements. In many cases, the descriptions are identical to appearances from 300 years earlier or 300 years later. Independent researchers suggest that the architects simply copied and pasted astronomical data from the Roman era and relabeled it for the faked medieval period. They needed to fill the software of their new timeline, so they recycled the stars. If you remove the 300 phantom years, the orbital math of Halley's Comet and the solar eclipses recorded by the ancients suddenly snaps into perfect 100% alignment. The universe is telling us that we are 300 years closer to the fall of Rome than the history books dare to admit. Architectural amnesia, the Romanesque rebrand. Now, let's look at the hardware. Let's look at the stone. History tells us that after the fall of Rome in 476 AD, humanity entered a dark age. We supposedly forgot how to build stone arches, how to use concrete, and how to create complex plumbing. We lived in wooden huts and mud for 500 years. Then, suddenly, around the year 1000 AD, a style called Romanesque architecture appeared out of nowhere. Look closely at Romanesque architecture. It uses the same rounded arches, the same barrel vaults, and the same stone-cutting techniques as the Romans. Are we supposed to believe that humanity suffered from total amnesia for 400 years, missing the entire phantom gap, and then remembered how to build exactly like the Romans, down to the last detail? In the Antiquitech paradigm, the answer is much simpler. The gap didn't exist. The Romanesque buildings aren't a rebirth of Roman style. They are the late Roman buildings themselves. The architects of the year 1000 simply found these majestic stone structures, survivors of the first reset, and rebranded them. They told the people, "These aren't Roman. These are medieval. We built these in honor of the new kings." They used the 300 phantom years as a buffer to make the Roman Empire feel like ancient history, when in reality, the Roman cement was still drying. The Byzantine mirror, the ghosts of Constantinople. While Western Europe was supposedly in the Dark Ages, the Byzantine Empire in the East was supposedly thriving. But even here, the timeline is stretched. Historical records show a bizarre mirroring effect. The wars, the successions, and the legal reforms of the Byzantine emperors between 600 and 900 AD are almost perfect duplicates of events from the 300 years prior. This is historiographic doubling. To create 300 years of time software, the architects needed a lot of content. They took the biographies of real Byzantine leaders and mirrored them into the future. They changed the names, tweaked a few dates, and created a parallel history. This is why there is so much legal confusion in the Byzantine archives. They are trying to manage a 300-year ghost that never actually paid taxes, fought wars, or built walls. The Byzantine Empire didn't survive the Dark Ages. It just lived through the phantom loop. The radiocarbon paradox. Modern science says it can prove the timeline using radiocarbon dating, C14. But if you talk to any honest archaeologist, they will tell you that C14 dating for the early Middle Ages is a mess. When artifacts from the Phantom Gap are tested, the results often come back with massive standard deviations. A sword from the year 800 AD often tests as being from 500 AD or 1100 AD. The science can't find a stable anchor in those 300 years. Why? Because C14 dating relies on a calibration curve that is based on You guessed it, the official historical timeline. The science is calibrated to match the lie. If the software of history says a piece of wood is from 700 AD, the scientists adjust their curve to make sure the carbon matches. It is a circular logic loop. But when you apply raw dating, uncalibrated and unbiased, the 300-year gap disappears. The wood from the fall of Rome and the wood from the start of the Crusades are biologically and chemically the same age. The Earth knows there was no gap. Only the architects need the time to stretch. The Great Buffer and the 1729 Revelation. The buffer zone. Hiding the reset. Why invent 297 years? If Otto III just wanted to rule in the year 1000, he could have just jumped ahead, right? But the architects needed those centuries to serve as a historical buffer zone. In the Antiquitech paradigm, a massive reset, a cataclysm that buried the old world in mud and erased the previous civilization, happened much more recently than we are told. If the public realized that the fall of the high civilization happened only 300 or 400 years ago, they would still remember how to use the energy. They would still know where the machines were buried. They would still have the blood memory of their true power. By stretching the timeline and adding 300 phantom years, the architects created a psychological distance. They pushed the old world back into the ancient past. They made the high-tech stone cities of the Romans and the Tartarians feel like myths from 1,000 years ago, rather than the homes of our great-grandparents. The 300-year gap is a memory eraser. It is the time the architects needed to clean up the ruins, hide the tech, and reprogram the orphan generation to believe they were living in a new world that started from zero. The 18th century. Glitch. Are we in 1729? If we remove the 297 phantom years from our current date of 2026, we arrive at the year 1729. Think about the world of the early 1700s. History tells us it was the Age of Enlightenment. It was a time of massive colonial expansion, the rise of the secret societies, the architects, and the beginning of the official banking system. If today is actually 1729, it explains the industrial paradox. It explains why, in the 1800s, which would actually be the late 1500s or 1600s in the real timeline, we suddenly saw an explosion of Antiquitech technology. Steam engines, wireless telegraphy, and massive stone architecture. It wasn't new technology. We were simply rediscovering the tech from the Roman era that had only been buried a few generations prior. The 300-year gap was a pause button that allowed the architects to consolidate power before rebooting humanity into the Industrial Revolution. We are much closer to the Golden Age than the history books want us to believe. Retrofitting the narrative, the creation of medieval. During those 300 phantom years, the architects were busy with the ultimate software update. They had to create a fake history to fill the gap. This is where the medieval fantasy comes in. They invented the Dark Ages, a time of knights, dragons, and feudal lords, to give people a narrative that explained the existence of the massive stone star forts and cathedrals they saw around them. They told the people, "Your ancestors built these for defense and religion during the 300-year Dark Age." In reality, those buildings were energy plants and resonators from the high-tech era. By inventing 300 years of sword and shield history, they masked the true purpose of the architecture. They turned technology into tradition. They turned etheric science into miracles. The medieval era is the ultimate gaslight, a fictional story used to explain the hardware of a world they didn't want us to understand. The psychological prison, time as a weapon. Why does it matter if the year is 2026 or 1729? Because time is a frequency. The architects know that if you control a person's sense of time, you control their identity. By placing us 300 years ahead of our real timeline, they have disconnected us from our biological and spiritual roots. We feel modern and advanced because we think we are at the end of a long, slow 2,000-year climb. But if we realized we are only a few centuries away from the Grand Reset, we would be in a state of high alert. We would be looking for the signs of the next cycle. By giving us phantom time, they gave us a false sense of security. They made us believe the end of the world or the great cataclysm is ancient history, something that only happened to primitive people in the Dark Ages. They have lulled us into a chronological sleep, making us easy to manage as they prepare for the next reset. The final wake-up call, reclaiming the now. The phantom time hypothesis is the master key to the entire verse. It explains why the orphan trains arrived in cities that looked thousands of years old, because they were only a few hundred years old. It explains why the 33rd parallel rituals are so consistent, because the architects have been running them for a much shorter, more intense period than we thought. It explains why the Antiquitech is still everywhere, because the mud flood is still fresh in the Earth's memory. We aren't living in the future. We are living in the recovery phase of a stolen past. When you realize that 300 years are missing, the architects lose their power. Their lineage becomes a joke. Their divine right becomes a forgery. You aren't a small point at the end of a long, dying line. You are an heir to a world that was just taken from you yesterday. The year isn't 2026. The year is now. And now is the only time the architects can't control. It's time to stop looking at the calendar and start looking at the code. The 300 years are gone, but the truth is still here, waiting to be downloaded by those who are brave enough to ask, "What time is it really?"